one, give it up for yourself for coming out tonight. Thank you guys so much. So this is our first Future Forward event. And so the first topic that we're going to explore this evening is called Designing for Sustainability. So sustainability is something that impacts all of our lives, no matter what role or who we are. Everything we do is kind of attached to the place that we live, the places that we occupy. So making sure that those places can continue to exist is very important. So we wanted to really kind of curate a community discussion and bring in some amazing people who have done amazing work in different ways in sustainability to really kind of get us thinking about how do we really build this sustainable future. So I'm sure you're wondering who the Garage is, and we'd love to kind of tell you a little bit more about who we are. So I'm going to invite the head of the Garage, Parsha, to kind of tell you guys a little bit about why sustainability is important to us and what kind of work we do. So.
Hi everybody. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Garage. We're a design company. We focus on solving problems and we focus on sustainability. Happy to share more about that. But tonight is not about our company. Tonight is about the topic, sustainability. So thank you for coming. It's really cool that so many people come. I don't know you, but I see cool faces. I see nice faces. So thank you for coming. I see familiar faces. And first I want to thank our team. I want to start with Maxwell and Mina. Mina, where are you? You're working really hard to get this all together. So that's and then our team, where is everybody? Can you put your hands up so we know where you are? Where is everybody? They work for us, designers, strategists, problem solvers. Yeah, sustainability, for me it's kind of a loaded term. It's almost becoming a little bit empty. And so I'm always interested, how can we translate all the talking into doing? And so I'm not a big fan of standing here and talking about myself. I'm really looking forward to having the speakers here and having a really good conversation together on what we can do. Design is a powerful tool, and I think all humans are designers in the end. So what can we do to create a better world? It was 20 degrees in Amsterdam at the beginning of the week where I was, and I said to myself, this is very weird. And then I came to Berlin and I thought it would be cold, and it was also 20 degrees. So yeah, I think we all recognize that something needs to happen fast, and we need to stop theorizing and start doing. So I want to welcome the speakers, and hope we're going to have a valuable evening all together here. Thank you very much.
The speakers would come join us up here. Thank you guys all for joining us this evening. So I think a good place to kind of start off, we're going to kind of go around so you guys can kind of get a sense for who's up here, what kind of expertise that they have, and what kind of perspectives they bring. So we're just going to kind of, Andreas, we're going to start with you, and then go this way, like who are you, why sustainability is a topic important to you, and yeah, those two things would be a good kind of kickoff.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation. It's a new format for me. I usually speak at scientific conferences. I'm a lobbyist in Brussels, so I speak to regulators. So my name is Andreas. I'm the Global Sustainability Director with First Solar, who is a US company based in Arizona, but active in about 33 markets around the world. And we're building utility-scale solar power plants, which deliver solar electricity. Yeah, my education is I'm a process engineer. I have studied in Germany. I grew up in East Germany and then experienced obviously the reunification of Germany. Made my degree in a mining school, and after that I first took a bit of a diversion, studied a couple of semesters in theology, and then I decided, okay, I really want to change something in the world with my knowledge, with my technical knowledge, but also with the knowledge I gained in studying theology on the cultural embedded, or basically the foundations of sustainability, which are deeply entrenched in our culture, in our history. So I said, okay, let's focus on education. So I worked for UNESCO for a couple of years, developed a book on life cycle management for school children, on circular economy, on recycling. And then I said, okay, if I want to move the needle, I have to join the industry. So I basically went to the energy sector, worked for Shell in the Netherlands, in the UK, for a couple of years. And then I said, okay, let's go to the solar industry. And that's where I am for about 15 years now. And I'm managing within First Solar the global sustainability program. So it's all about the topic of tonight, right? And if you wonder what this means for me today, it's really about creating an energy future which is, inherently sustainable, right? And sustainability means, first of all, if I have to use one word to characterize sustainability, for me it would be endurance. So the capability of humanity to endure and to survive and to basically enable future life on this planet, that is the core mission I'm working on every day within First Solar. And maybe that's enough for an introduction.
Okay, hi, I'm Anabel. Good to being here. So thank you for the invitation. Because I love to talk about sustainability, the more the better. Because I think nowadays time it's so important to talk about that. So everybody's talking about digitization, but sustainability is the key from my point of view. Because if we just take without giving back, we can't guarantee that there's something left. And I think the world is something which is given as a present, and we have the duty to give something back to even make the world a better place. I started doing volunteer things when I was 6, being at the North Coast. Some of you maybe know it, Norddeich-Mode. It's where a train has this end when you want to go to the East Sea. Don't know. Does anybody know this? Norddeich-Mode? Okay, I went there and there was laying some rubbish at the beach, and I was so angry because I wanted to moving there. There were some doves, and I thought, okay, they started eating this plastic, and I found this really ugly, and I wanted to do something against it. So I mobilized some friends in my primary school and said, okay, we take a bus, going there, picking up the rubbish, and helping the doves. So my parents found me a bit weird, but they couldn't do anything against it because I was always very energetic. So I went there, and that was the starting of my Help the Animals Club. So that was when I was 6. We created some buttons out of paper with smileys on it and a needle behind to put it there, and we sold them then seeds to have some money we could spend on some printing products to give to the people who wanted it or not wanted it. We funded against hunters, and because we thought it's not good that they shoot the animals. So that was quite early, and my parents said, okay, can you stop it, please? This is my daughter. Okay. And so it went further with fighting against smoking, and everywhere where I went, I took some non-smoking badges with me, got on the nerves of some people, I guess. Then I studied, I graduated in education, business administration, psychology, and studied also history of arts. It was always I had always two hearts in me. One is for good design, because I like really things which smells good, look good. So good design was always my topic, but also on the other hand, doing something for the better. So I thought similar to you, I make some money first and then go back into the volunteering part. So I started in Taiwan because I did my thesis about a psychoanalytic part, interviewing an author which had an Oedipus complex, and this was the topic of my thesis, and he had strong connections to Taipei, so I thought, good plan, going to Taiwan and worked there for Libre Industrial, for a company doing with glass, coming then back with with a program for young women to supporting in their career. I'm working for Ideal Home Range, an interior company. I built this company up worldwide. So I did business development, design, marketing, and sales. And it was really fulfilling for me. But besides, I did always volunteering. So, for example, I founded a school for people from social minor areas. Worked for Amnesty International, Terre des Hommes, Terre des Femmes, founded campaigns in several countries, and then moved to Louis Vuitton, Fielmann, Samsonite, but I always had the feeling that the job was something where I couldn't earn enough to really save the world for the better, but I had to work so much that there was not so much enough left to doing the good things. So after being then in a hospital for 2 years, and it was almost not clear if I get out of this hospital, and I got out in a wheelchair, it was clear for me that if I have a chance to use the time in my life I've given, using it for something which is really good and not wasting it for something which is just nice, but not doing something for the better. So during the hospital, I had good friends from different countries that visited me on a regular basis, and they said, Anabel, you have some gift to move something. You are so energetic, use it. So during these 2 years, I founded 4 companies, one in Turkey, in Izmir, one in Vienna, in Austria, one in France, in Cannes, and another in Abu Dhabi. One was about Eco-Delta. It's still alive. It's about giving saving energy for households, but also for companies, with solar energy, but also with plastic you put on the window to save the energy inside, but also from outside. And then there was another company in Turkey where it was about rubbish, saving rubbish and reusing it, which was sold later on to the government. In Abu Dhabi, it was the new leaders generation, where we put together VIPs and people with a lot of money to social projects, which needed money, and did, for example, actions like in Eldoret in Kenya, football games, where the patron was Obama, to bring this young people together to build up their own town again. So I did some things, and after these 2 years, I decided to completely stop with my company career. And then I got the offer to apply for a professorship. At that time, I thought, this is weird, professorship I never thought about, because I thought about somebody who is really, something standing above, have no connection to the people on the ground. But then I thought it's good, because working with students can spread this message out and can support some, or give them a story maybe to them, to give them the idea that it's good to start at first straight ahead with something good and not just doing the curve as I did with companies like Fielmann or something. So 1 year later, I got the professorship, and from there I moved to Berlin. So I'm from 2012 in Berlin, started there first for e-business and communication management, and then I was offered to take the lead of the International Institute for Sustainability Management, where there are working 13 people working all over the world on different projects like biogas, solar, photovoltaic, mainly in the emerging markets, so Africa, for example. And in Africa, I'm also very active with GetYourWings. GetYourWings is my baby since 2.5 years. I founded it because I thought that there are some organizations dealing with digitization, going into schools, but that it's more or less, hey, I'm Microsoft. Do you want my hardware? You can also get my software, and that's it. And I wanted to give the young people an idea that digitalization is a chance for you to strengthen your personality, to doing something for your awareness on health and environment, and to strengthen your abilities on digitalization, that it all has to come together. And digitalization is not an enemy, but it's more a chance to spread out the word for the better. So we started with a few schools, going into the schools with some workshops where we start often baking or cooking, and then at the end the people knows how to code and make. We work with Calliope, Scratch, or Makey, and in the end they can code, have the rudimental abilities to doing this, know something about fighting against cyber mobbing, and knows also how to integrate digitalization for the good. Yeah. So I can talk a bit longer.
If you want. We'll have plenty of time to talk this. We're gonna go to Ferdi quickly, like 2-3 sentences maybe.
Yeah, no, I have to apologize due to the climate change that we had earlier in the discussion. I'm suffering from a bit of asthma from the allergy, so my breath is not that long. I won't be able to expand so much. But I was born and raised in South Africa, in a little place called Palabora, which is right at the border of the Kruger National Park. So my first sensations on this planet were very much about nature and their closeness. So rather than go into a CV discussion, I'll start off by asking a thought experiment, which is we all excited about artificial intelligence, right? It's like artificial thing. And so my question is, if artificial intelligence gets so smart that we can decode animal language, and we can have a conversation with a dolphin, we can have a conversation with a whale, we can find out what the birds are tweeting. What would the purpose of our conversation be with them, right? What is the conversation that you would want to get into with a horse or with some other animal? And I think that that raises the question of what is our purpose? Why do we have breath and a body? And why did we manifest in this particular way? And I think that for me is the guiding principle that I have in the work that I do right now. Is asking, well, what is the purpose of this engagement? So that is why I co-founded the Ready School, because I came back to Germany and I looked at the cultural context of what was going on here, and together with Anne, we decided to translate that into something quite actionable. So I've been in Berlin, I don't know how long, because it depends on how you measure it. I've been registered here for 2 years, but I've been coming back and forth most probably for 20 now, because there's something very special about what happens in Berlin. I think that there's an opportunity here to transcend ourselves. And just in the same way my thought experiment was asking you to transcend your human experience and kind of become part of something bigger, I hope that our conversation tonight helps us each individually to transcend a little bit that thing that we take for granted.
That was a kick-ass introduction.
So, my name is Sebastian, and catching on all this kick-ass introductions, trying to be not too far away from that. And so, I'm kind of a designer at heart. Yeah, so when I was in school, I asked myself, so there are so many shitty products out there, and they're really wasting our time, our environment, and anything. So why shouldn't I study design? So I studied design, but get really fascinated what was going on in the digital space there. It was in the early 2000s, and I went that route, yeah, and did a lot of crazy stuff with airplanes and so on and so forth. But then I come to a point in my career where I have to make a decision whether stay a designer, because I was also recognizing, okay, designers are always nice to have them on the table, but when it comes to the big decisions, really investing into change or new products is always done by the business people, right? And that's why I decided to go to the dark side of the moon, so to say, yeah, and then study economics, yeah, because I wanted to understand that, yeah, and but I was focusing on the topic of innovation because I wanted to understand what innovation was all about, yeah, and did everything from accounting always, okay, what does accounting mean for innovation? Yeah, what does this and that mean for innovation from a business perspective? Yeah, but always stayed in the mindset of a designer, yeah, looking at problems and want to solve problems and also want to make not only inventions but innovations. And innovations are things that are sellable, yeah, and making an impact because they're also viable from an economic point of view. Yeah, not only great ideas, because great ideas, I have a lot of them, but how to scale them. And after founding startup, being in Silicon Valley, blah, 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 I decided after one of the big failures of my career, I had the chance to come to Berlin in 2009 because someone asked me, so well, I'm building kind of corporate accelerator program here in Berlin. And I said, oh, that sounds interesting. Because I learned now a lot about innovation and startups and stuff like that, and then I became the first employee of the Hubraum incubator. And 2 years before it was called Hubraum Incubator. And so I took the really long road through the organization and fighting against all the impediments inside of such an organization that tried to keep away innovation from the business. And especially innovation that could kill the business, at least potentially. And so I learned a lot about organizations, but I also realized we need big organizations to do things at scale. And because it takes a long time for new products or startups maybe to come to that point that you're big and scalable. And I did that now for 10 years and I did that for one companies, for example, also RW in Energy. I built up the innovation hub for RW Energy for the first 2.5 years here in Berlin, and came also in touch with the sustainability topic, because when you think about, okay, what we are starting to do now with this digitization, is it now doing e-commerce and stuff like that? Maybe we should solve bigger problems using the technology and the tools and also the business models that we see. And this is something that is now pushing me, especially now as a father, thinking about, okay, I have kids, and what kind of world my kids will live in. I have a responsibility for that. I have to explain them, I don't know, not maybe in 20 years, but maybe already in 5 years, maybe already today. My 7-year-old son is asking me, so why are you having all this kind of shitty problems? And I'm responsible for that as well, because I was a designer working for large corporations and did some crazy stuff. Also that probably harmed the environment. We all did that. But we have to become aware of that. And over the course of the last years, I started thinking more about this impact on sustainability, using those technologies, and I come to the conclusion that we have to use what we have learned in the startup world or in the digital space. We have to do things at scale, because I think we all love to do nice sustainability projects, and they're all worth it, all the efforts we put into. But if you want to really solve the problems that we currently facing and that we are going to face in the future, we have to do it at scale, at massive scale. Because otherwise, it was a nice try, but we will fail. And one other thing that is, from my perspective, really important is to do it at scale, we need a business model. We need a viable business model, and we need to earn money with the solutions for sustainability. Because otherwise, who's paying for that? And if you want to do it at scale, we need really large amounts of money, and we are not getting investors on board that look for a viable business model that might create a return on investment on their investment. And so we need a viable business model that is able to earn money. But to compare it with most of the business models that we see in the regular economy, they are monetizing negative external effects, as the economist would say, by polluting something to the air, to the oceans, and you're monetizing that because you not have to pay for that. Someone else is paying for that, and we need to find business models that monetizing positive external effects. For example, doing CO2 sequestration, or using solar cells to reduce that, and using some part of the money maybe even to sequester or doing something else. We have to go beyond sustainability. From my opinion, we have to go into regeneration. Because so many things are already fucked up.
So with that, I think we'll dive into the discussion. I think one of the important things that we need to remind why sustainability as a topic is even important is because as we've developed as a society, we've kind of disconnected from kind of nature, the first designer. And so nature doesn't design anything with waste. And so as we as humans kind of have evolved and we've kind of taken this this path where we're not as impacted by our environments, we've also kind of lacked the ability to think through the designs of the things that we make. And so the responsibility, I think it's been mentioned multiple times, like we have that responsibility. Now, because we have had progress, we also have to say at what cost. And I think the cost that we're talking about, whose cost? We all suffer because plastic ends up in the ocean. So how do we make sure that from the beginning of us making something, we have holistic design, sustainability, right? There's lives after a product's first use, like that has to go in as soon as we come up with an idea. And so I think it's really important, like as we move towards the future, as designers, each of us, in designing our lives, designing companies, products, services, we need to start putting on our designer mentality as kind of the first thing. So I'd love, maybe we can start with Ferdi and then Andreas. What are some of the best examples of that holistic designs that you've seen from like companies or different individuals around kind of theories or concepts? Are there some favorites that you have?
Yeah, I think first it's most probably important to clarify my understanding of holistic design then, because that would inform the example. And when I was at IDEA, we always used to talk a lot about energy as being a sector that's kind of really important for sustainability because of the impact that it has. And I would quote, I can't remember who I was quoting, but it was, are we leveraging the smartest part of the smart grid, which is the consumer behavior around it. And something like 98% of the investment goes onto the supply side of energy markets, and very little goes to innovation around the demand side. So if you really want to shift the dial, are you looking at the right part of that equation? So for me, a holistic design would include the communities that you depend on in order for your solution to really make an impact. We all are perplexed by this challenge that we have, that as car consumption has decreased, the total amount of kilometers that people drive increases, because I feel better about driving a car that has lower consumption. So we have these unintended consequences that come from our design. So if we just focus on the narrow indicators, like how do I get, liters per 100 kilometer down, that's not really a holistic design. We have to take a look at the patterns of behavior associated with your solution. So I think by far and above, my favorite company in this area is Coffee Circle, because what Martin and his team have done is that they started by focusing on the communities, and they wanted to understand how are we working with people in Ethiopia and in these other countries to actually change the system. And the coffee which comes out of it is almost kind of an afterthought. If you take a look at it, last year I think they put something like €500,000 back into the Ethiopian economy on these kind of products. So for me, that is a truly holistic approach to it. And I suppose it's in the name of their company as well.
Yes, yeah. Do you have a favorite example?
There are many examples. One which I want to quote here maybe relates a little bit also to my company and why I joined First Solar about 10 years ago, and that is the chairman of the board back then, Mike Heerden, who is founding many sustainability initiatives today still, and he's still the chairman of the board of First Solar. He said, okay, we have to think about our product, and you need to be focusing on this book, right? And he handed me a book by Richard Braungärtner, Cradle to Cradle. I don't know if that's known by some people in the room here, but basically he said if we don't want to do renewable energy right, we need to do it in a way that we holistically think about the product from the beginning when we're designing it, when we're designing the panel, when we're designing the system. We need to think about how do we operate, how do we maintain, how do we take it back, recycle it, and put it back into use for the same purpose, right? So that was very inspirational, seeing that coming from someone who gets a couple of $1 million from the Walmart family to found First Solar, to bring it public, and to scale it. And thinking about it that holistically, saying, okay, when we built the first factory, I want to make sure we also built the first recycling factory, even though the product we're designing has a design life of 25 to 30 years. He said we need to do recycling as well. We need to think about it from the beginning to close the loop on the resources we use. Even though it's a renewable energy technology, we still need minerals, we still need metals to make it work, right? And I want to make sure that every kilogram of material we use can be used 1,000 years or even longer by doing a cradle-to-cradle design. And that was very inspirational, and in fact that's what we're still striving towards too. I mean, we have recycling. We have a recycling plant here in Frankfurt-Oder where we do recycling for all the European markets, but obviously it can be improved, right? And every technology generation we develop at the drawing board takes exactly that into consideration. Can we recycle it? Can we use recycled content? Post-consumer, post-industrial recycled content to address the circular economy, energy transition nexus. Because even though we're renewable, we still need to make sure that the scale we need to achieve, and coming back to what you said on scale, right? It took us 50 years to build 500 gigawatts of solar PV globally, 500 gigawatts. In order to achieve the Paris Agreement, we need to get to 5 terawatts. 5 terawatts. That's 100 times more than what we achieved in 50 years, and we only have 20 years left, right? In order to do that, we really need to make sure we have a circular economy model, because we will not be able to do that in a linear fashion. We cannot scale linearly. We have to do it circularly. So that's what I think is a very inspiring example. Having the chairman of the board, who's dealing with billions of dollars, saying we have to do it right from the beginning. We have to invest, even though it doesn't pay back immediately, but only in 20 years. Do it cradle to cradle.
And I think a lot, I mean, in terms of how we kind of our gateway in society, it's education. So a lot of the way that we learn how to participate is these different models, different theories, different practices that either the examples that we get from our environment, what we learn in school. And so I think a big part of redesigning society to a more sustainable future comes from education, right? How we're learning to participate. So I'd love to hear from you, Anabel, if you could share a little bit about, what do we need to think about in terms of like education design to start having sustainability be at the core of what we learn.
So I think in Germany we have a very special situation. Of course, from the past we learned that diversity is something good, especially in education. Of course, having experience from some centuries ago, we know that education centralized can be a tricky one. But how diversity has lived in education in Germany is really hard to cover, because we made a lot of mistakes and haven't used the diversity for the good, mainly. Looking, for example, at Berlin, we have so many differences in school. We have the schools which are offering very, very, very high standard, also in educating really sustainable behavior, holistic ideas. And on the other hand, we have schools which are really low standard, even from the ground, from the building itself, where you can't step into a few rooms, where there's no teacher which can really teach the topics he's talking about, because he's teaching English but can't speak English, for example. No? And this is not rare. That's not a sample which is really exception, and that's a pity. And I think that education has to be remodeled here in Germany completely from the ground. Because what I'm seeing here and what is planned for the future, this digital pact, which should be with 5 billion something, which is really changing the world of education. Yes, maybe on a short scale, but not on a long scale. It doesn't help anybody if each school has enough hardware and enough software fitting to that. It's about giving ability to the teacher, and not only in using machines, but even more in using machines for the better. As I said, digitalization can be used for really good things, driving campaigns, social campaigns, for example, through the whole world. But a lot of teachers are just struggling with 35 people in front of them, which we call inclusion, and which means that a few of them can't speak German at all, and others are really at the high scale and bored because they are far away from and want to learn something more. So we have a really terrible situation, I think, which we have to change from the ground. And also the idea of the government now to hire more teachers, which are not teachers, but came from coaching, for example, or other areas, driving more diversity into schools. but giving them an attractive package of salaries is, I think, the wrong idea, because a teacher shouldn't be the person who is willing to earn a lot of money or having a safe job. Teacher should be somebody who is skilled and driven and energetic and want to teach students something where they have the ability to change the world with these competences they get from the teachers. So I think there's a huge work to do. And when I started with GetYourWings, it was I had a long discussion with a friend who said, Anabel, this should come from the government, not from organizations like you. Because if organizations like you start here going into schools, then the government has no chance to do it from their own. I said, we don't have time yet anymore. We have to act. And if the government takes 20 years to change something, we don't have the time. We need to have the children in front of us, which are now 7, 10, 15 years old, which are open-minded and want to do something. I mean, I don't need to look at Greta, for example. I think most of you know Greta, no? Don't you? I mean, she has Asperger's syndrome, she's Swedish, she has a few exceptions, distinctions, but she could be everybody. There are so many, and going into primary schools, it brings me a smile on my face, because I see there's so many open-minded small kids which think about our world and think about sustainability. Of course, they don't know the word, but they have this idea and they see what's happening, what's ongoing. They think about it and they get worried. They said, I tried to talk with my parents about this, but my parents can't give me any answer. And I think the primary schools are exactly the right place to start with something like this, because the small kids already understand this. They are in some point a bit more, we said, often adults said more naive. I would say they're more open-minded, because they see the whole reality and they don't have this blind idea of, oh, we have to make money first, oh, we have to make money, oh, we have to fight against a competitor. They're very open-minded and see it much better. So I think it's important to start already in the primary school, and then it's important that the teacher, which are teaching the old ones, continue with this idea, because often in primary school I see a lot of open-minded teachers. Later on in the gymnasium or something, no, I see a lot of very narrow-minded teachers.
And I think that brings us back to what you were saying in terms of the sense of urgency. So, you know, we had this next generation of kids who we're right now making a lot of the decisions around what's shaping our future, right? And so when we look at the next generation and when they look to us and they look at the decisions that we've made, are we going to be able to say that we're proud of we took action, or there's something that we actually stepped in to do during this time where kind of change is accelerating? And so I'd be really interested, because with this kind of sense of urgency, we really don't have time, necessarily to take things at small steps. And Sebastian, you were talking a little bit about doing things at scale. Like, what are different kind of initiatives or companies who are really kind of tackling this at scale?
So I want to say one thing what you just said. Yeah? And so my son is now 7 years old. He's a first grader, and I was also try to engage at school, because I want to understand how schools are working, also especially from my perspective of digitization and sustainability, etc. So we have to be engaged, because otherwise it's just running. And so spending some time there. And there was one meeting of teachers and also the director of the school, and talking about digitization. Yeah? And they were talking about how can we teach our kids PowerPoint on 10-year-old laptops that need 10 minutes time to boot, yeah, and this is what they think is digitization, yeah, and now I come back to the sustainability and also to the scalability. We need to teach our kids to come up with a narrative where they stand behind, and you cannot teach them doing that using PowerPoint. They need to stand up on stage and have their narrative, pitching to the others, convincing to the others, because it's in them. Yeah, they don't have to learn it later, because when I work for a big corporate organization, now I say, let PowerPoint away. Go on stage and have a story, have a narrative, and have an aspirational narrative. And we need to bring that to school. So regarding your topic and a question on scale, I think, there's this also very prominent example of what Elon Musk is doing. Yeah, so I think he's a crazy dude. Yeah, and he's really doing things differently. probably everything he's doing differently, yeah, and he's really challenging the status quo at scale. Yeah, and you don't have to like everything what he says and what he does, yeah, but he thinks at scale. Yeah, and first when he started Tesla, he said, okay, we want to build a company with the purpose of creating sustainable transport. Yeah, but 2 years ago, he changed it to sustainable energy. Yeah, and he's building a fully integrated energy company, yeah, with producing energy, or the devices that produce the energy, the storage devices, and the cars that use the energy. And I don't know if it's going to work, but if he has everything under control within this within the system, he can make it work better than anybody else. Yeah, because it's a software company, it's a technology company, and they control the whole value chain. Yeah, and the whole technology chain. And this is what stands behind Tesla. And if it's going to work, it will be at scale. Yeah, at massive scale, an even bigger scale than that we can now imagine. And we have to have this kind of thinking, yeah, not doing things small like BMW. Oh, let's build some i3 and blah blah blah. Yeah, and try a little bit. We have to think big and have to challenge the status quo, and that's really hard for incumbent companies.
And maybe Andreas, you can add a little bit to kind of the at-scale discussion. I know you guys do. I mean, you guys are a huge company. I think you have a lot of context. How do you guys do it?
Sure. I mean, you know, so scale certainly is important, right? I mean, that's for sure. And but achieving scale on its own merits is very, very difficult, right? So talking about the solar industry, since you mentioned Tesla, but you know, we're part of that as well. It is today, if you think about innovative design, right, and think about a new technology concept, right, if you want to bring that to the market, which is dominated by China Inc., right, so by a very strong industrial policy with very cheap financing, bringing things to scale in the solar industry, if you want to disturb that system, if you want to make a difference, you immediately need to jump a hurdle, which is multiple billions of dollars of investment you need to mobilize in the capital markets. Scaling even the most sustainable idea will require a lot of innovative, potential. Will require a lot of endurance in the business sector to actually bring it to fruition. But I fully agree. I mean, if you want to do that, if you want to play that game, and you want to further reduce the cost of renewable electricity, then this will only happen at scale, right? So, but I wanted to come back to one thing, closing loop on education, right? Since I was working with UNESCO, almost 1.5 decades ago, we actually developed a school book on circular economy for the Arabic Union, right? For the Pan-Arabic states, starting in Morocco up to the Middle East, called Rashid the Recycler. And then the second version was Dana and Rashid the Recyclers, which really brought to the primary schools the idea of a circular economy. I've never come across such a book here in Germany, right? I have 2 daughters. One is in the 3rd grade, the other one getting to school in 2 years. Never come across that, right? Same thing on solar energy, right? So I donated a solar education kit to the school my daughter is in to basically bring real world example of what solar can actually do to the kids, right? They can build with solar cells, they can build with batteries, and they learn it. I get the teachers educated by a specialized, trainer. It's not in the curriculum, right? And I think that is a big lack we see here, which I certainly see.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I'm a part of the Future Water Saving Club, which is founded by a New Zealand guy. And we're currently writing books like that.
Good.
Yeah.
But bring them to school, right?
Exactly, that's the idea. There are coming people from all over the world co-writing this book, and it's about young kids founding a club from all over the world, bringing together this idea and spreading out the word. That's the story.
Well, it's happening.
But I think that there's a reason why the topic of education has resonated so strongly with the panel, because it's one of the strong leverage factors in achieving scale. So if you want to get societal change, you need to focus on education, and that's the reason why dictatorships always grab hold of the textbooks as soon as they can, because that's a change that comes for 10 or 15 years. So when I was looking more closely at design for education, I think one of the most striking things that I came across there is this paradigm shift that's happening in the way that we view education. And for the majority of us, as we were going through schooling systems, the paradigm was that education is the transfer of data, which means that I measure success in education if what's written in the textbook corresponds with what you've written on a piece of paper. I think the paradigm has shifted towards understanding education as capacity and capability building and measuring it through behavior change. In other words, by taking a look at what is the behavior that this person is capable of after they've gone through a process of exposure. And I think that it's important to understand that we're not going to change the next generation or address their needs by just simply providing different content. We have to provide different experiences, and we have to create a new way of looking at the way that education works. So it is a fundamental building block of scaling change.
Yeah, and I would say, I think, particularly with the education discussion, it's like, it's not what used to be the focus is what you learn, but I think as we have more access to information, it's more important how you learn. So if you have the ability to use, because the information is always going to change. In fact, information is changing at a pace that it's hard for us to keep up. And so if we're designing children that just have one-way regurgitation, then we're designing them for a world that they're not going to live in. So we have to be very intentional about how we develop these tools. So I think one last question before we kind of open it up to kind of a larger discussion, because I know there's a lot of knowledge in this room, so let's make sure we take advantage of it. If you were going to kind of paint your world for a sustainable future in like 20 years, right, in like 4 to 5 sentences, what does that world look like? So maybe we'll start with Sebastian.
So I was in December in Kenya, and wanted to learn something about agriculture in developing countries. We shouldn't call them developing countries, but we tend to do that, and everyone knows what that means.
Previously colonized is the new term they're going for. True story.
And so why I think that's interesting and important for the future, because one big challenge besides the CO2 and global warming is food. Food supply for the billions of people that are going to live on the planet. When we now look at this agricultural space, especially in those countries, we have 500 million people supplying 70% of the food for the people right now. And they're doing that with kind of low technology, but we shouldn't apply the technologies that we have here in a big agricultural industry to those countries, because then we are really finally destroy the planet. That's for sure, and that's why looking out for into 20 years, I really see regenerative agriculture that is empowered or enabled by technology. Because one thing you need to do, you have to educate and find ways of doing the right things on the right plot of land in a sustainable or even regenerative way, so making the land maybe good again, the soil. And producing food that is somehow decentralized, because we have to bring it to the people in a highly efficient way. And doing that in smaller sizes for the community is way more efficient than doing it in large plots, like we do it in Germany, or in the US or somewhere else. And this is what I really see, that we can use technology to solve that type of challenges and help the people all over the world to get good food supply, but making the planet also a better planet from a environmental perspective.
Right, you heard.
It's a very difficult question, really, and one that I've actually spent a substantial amount of time on a project we were doing for a think tank. And the interesting thing is we came up with 3 kind of scenarios that we could work towards, and a lot of it depends on who owns your data. Right, and it's not so obvious in the first instance that the world we're going to live in depends on who owns our data, but it's essentially you either end up in China, where the data becomes a public good and is owned by the state, and that there's a central planning system that determines how these things work, or you end up living in the nation of Amazon, Google, or Apple, where corporates own your data, and that then essentially their incentives and their intentions define how sustainability is evolved, right? Because that's it. The third one in the middle was a scenario that we were not able to crack. And that is where you have a kind of a modular citizen economy, where we engage in full ownership of our data and exchange with other people to create new value in those ways. And I'm also a firm believer in the regenerative movement, and I think one of the key elements there is this concept of fragility and resilience. And so my hope is that we can move towards this kind of like middle scenario that is extremely difficult to actually manifest. Because I think the two extremes that you have are far too fragile. Right? Putting all of our eggs into those baskets, I don't think is going to be good for humanity or for the planet.
I agree to both of you and I wanted
Yes.
to add something. I think the key is really humanity. I think during the last decades, money got a more and more decision-making topic, and there were some crises in religion. So a lot of people got rid of religion and don't believe in anything than money, or be competitive, be better than another person. And I think we should stay with our humanity, with our values, which is, for example, respect to each other, staying authentic, or be responsible not for you, but also for the others, but also for your environment. And there comes again education in the game. But it's also something what I think is important is we are always talking about diversity, and often digitization tries to look at one person and try to talk just about the others and the ones. And I think it's important to live diversity and strengthen our different cultures. So looking, for example, to Australia or to other indigene populations, it's so important what knowledge is based there about, for example, herbs or special things which can heal you and go back to your intuition. And these are things, also the human failure, this is not something which is minor, it's a part of our humanity, and therefore my future world has enough space for that, enough space for respect to each other, love with each other, and listening to each other, and a deep impact on the social effects. So besides the content-wise, I think which should still education be deliver content, the soft skills we call it are for me very important and should be able for everybody to live, to know and love.
All right, yeah, being the engineer or being an engineer, let me play the techie nerd role here. So 20 years, what I think, and I'm a technology optimist, I have to say, that what drives me out of bed every morning. I see that we have a solar-fueled economy globally, right? And we have solutions implemented which are already available today to use the solar light we get in excess every day to produce fuels, to produce fertilizers, to power agricultural systems which can feed 10 billion people, to desalinate water, to close the energy-water nexus. So all these things I hope we'll be able to achieve in the next 20 years. And in fact, the science and technology behind it is well understood. It now needs to really take a lot of effort to shape the regulatory landscape globally to make it happen, right? And again, that comes back to what you said also on data, right? So we can think about two models here, right? We can think about a centralistic model where you have a kind of a dictatorship saying, okay, this is best for the planet, we do it that way. That's a strong motivation behind the Chinese industrial policy on renewables. Or you can have a more fragmented individual solution where people and communities can actually play that role. And I believe that the community model has a lot of benefits, and we see that also with the energy system. When you have a decentralized solution, you can actually create a lot of resilience and don't rely on massive mega projects or mega infrastructures. which I think will also be a crucial thing for the future. So I believe in the community model plus a solar economy.
I'll just add a couple of sentences because I think it's very inclusive. I think one of the big things as we move towards like a more sustainable future that we have to think about is identity. I think, you know, whatever identities that we take on, I think identity is a way that we start dividing the world. And so if kind of the core anchor that we have as identity, or we kind of teach and we educate as an identity of first being someone who's of Earth, and then everything else comes after that. Because I think a lot of the struggles we have is that we start infighting, and whether it's whatever philosophies or doctrines we're taught, those conflict. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a space or a place in which to occupy, it harms everyone. And so really starting at the core identity of wherever you end up on this earth, like we're in that together. And I think if we can kind of start looking at that as a shared identity, and we focus on progress, not perfection, there's a lot that we can do. So I think that's my hope for the future, is that we start with that kind of change in identity, and I think from there, lots of stuff can blossom. So with that, we'll open up to questions. If you would raise your hand, and I will call on you, and then you can direct your questions to any of the panelists. I saw a hand here first.
Ferdi had hinted at something one may call rebound effects or unintended consequences. So Tata Nano is an example, very fuel-efficient car, but if more people buy the car, then the absolute consumption of fuel is greater. And often I see that issue that technology optimism is great because there's more efficiency, etc. But on absolute level, more and more people keep consuming. This is just the way our world works in terms of scaling, etc. So, any ideas on that particular issue? How you basically incorporate that into the design, kind of the circular economy design, so that you do take care of rebound effects, which often people don't even know what that means. People who are in relevant positions.
Do you want me to answer? There's a story about the guy with the horse, right? Where he's walking in his field and he finds this horse, and he's like very excited, and he asks around, nobody knows, so he thinks, I've just got a new horse, that's excellent. And then his son gets on the horse, and then he falls off the horse and he breaks his leg, and he's like, this is a bad horse, broke my son's leg. And then a war breaks out and his son can't go to the war, so he stays at home. He's like, good horse, he saved my son from going to it. And the story kind of goes on. But the point of design is that success depends on where you draw the line. So in that story, there are different moments where you can draw the line and say, this is what success looks like, or this is what success looks like, and this is what success looks like. And if we're looking at designing kind of nested systems, you can illustrate that by the hotel example as well, where if I'm working as a shift manager in a hotel, air conditioner breaks, and I've got a customer who's very upset, and then I go there and I call the engineer, and he comes and he fixes the air conditioning unit. Imagine you're in Manhattan and you've got one of those big blocks sitting outside your window, that's the air conditioning unit. For the people in that system, they feel excellent, we've solved the problem, right? So that's where they measure success. If I'm the manager of that hotel and I look at my expenses for fixing air conditioning units over the year, I begin to realize that, at $300 an hour, it starts getting very expensive. So why don't we have a centralized air conditioning system so you don't have all these units breaking the whole time? And so then I'm like, success. We spent $1.5 million and we've saved all of these things, and all of our customers are happy because they don't constantly get interrupted by engineers coming in and fixing the air conditioning unit. Now, if I'm the owner of this chain of hotels, I'm thinking air conditioning really sucks, right? It's like one of the worst contributors, not only to the energy consumption, but all of the other kind of things. Why don't we design our buildings in a way that we don't need air conditioning? Because that way we can create a new experience, we can attract different customers. So if you're designing a nested system, I think it's quite important to ask yourself, who's my client and what is their point of view on this challenge? Because on every design project you get to a point where you say, am I going to recommend the right solution for my client? And that's what they're willing to pay for. Or am I going to recommend the solution to this problem? And if my client is the manager of the hotel and I come with a new air conditioning free design for his hotel, he's not going to understand that. Right? So to get back to your point, I think in the relationship that you have with the person who wants to bring about change, you've got to ask yourself, what is their point of view on the challenge? And then are we able to elevate that to a level where we can include the feedback loop? Was that how? Yeah, okay.
We're gonna more quick. So we have one here and then here.
Well, first, thank you for the talks. I'm a student in sustainability in creative industries in Berlin, and I've always been thinking like you thought about great pillars that are important for the sustainability in the design part, which are a new business model, which to me circular economy works perfect so far, and education. But I always have this thought that it hasn't been resolved about how to communicate the final designs to the actual consumers, and how to make more aware the designers to design with functionality. Because yeah, we can educate kids, which is great, but we need to take action as soon as we can. So the first action that I think it would be great if we educate the customers, but how? I don't know if you have an answer for that question.
So, from my experience and my point of view, I think it's really important to create transparency about the consequences. Yeah, and without educating just from the bad point of view, but from the good point of view. So what you're really creating if you're using a different type of product. And I think we lack, also from a business perspective, we lack this type of communication because we think the consumer is stuck in their thinking and their behavior because we teach them for decades to behave like that. Yeah? And if we now change that, we might interrupt them. So, for example, having an SUV, it's like, okay, let's do SUVs. Yeah? And even if they're electric, it doesn't make any sense because they're just too big. Yeah, and too heavy and too bad efficiency when it comes to wind, etc. Yeah, but if we show them the consequences and find probably a way also from a business model perspective to say, okay, you don't have to own a car, yeah, and you just get the car and use less money that you would otherwise use, yeah, and it's maybe not that good on the short term for me as a business, but on the long term I will create a totally different narrative for my brand, yeah, and we switch our brand to more kind of, we change mobility towards sustainable mobility, and this is the narrative. And I think most of the companies that are out there, they probably are able to create with great designers and great minds, great products that probably are already able to do that. But I think everyone fearing to offend the user in their behaviors, which we trained for the last decades. And we should work on that.
I'll add a couple sentences because this is something that frustrates me sometimes. I think the constantly putting the onus on the consumer to make educated decisions is overwhelming. Like the amount of things that you purchase or you buy or like things that you interact with each day, for you to have to do the due diligence and research on each and every one of those decisions, I think it's an insane thing to expect. So I think the expectation has to be shift the narrative from like consumers have to figure all this stuff out to like everything we make like needs to be sustainable and holistic, and then we can figure out how we need to price that such that people can participate. But like I think it's unfair to say you have to do that research because that's a lot of stuff to do. So I think it has
market capitalists freak out.
I think it has to be like tackled at both ends. Yes, as consumers we should be educated about the decisions that we're making, but I think it has to happen at both sides because I mean it's a lot.
How many people have read Anna and Garila's book, The Winners Take All? How many of you have Winners Take All?
How many have read it? By show of hands? We've got one.
Okay. Because I would strongly recommend that as
The book is called Winners Take All by,
Anand, I can't pronounce it, Gary Haridas.
I think Winners Take All, probably.
If you get a surname you can't pronounce it. But he talks about exactly this issue, right, in terms of that a lot of people create kind of simple solutions to these challenges by putting the blame on the victim. And in this, like if you take a look at the opioid crisis, it's the people who are taking the opioids are the one, but it's actually the laws and the pharma companies who are creating that issue. And so I fully agree with you, and I think that once you've read through that book, I think you can see the system that is used to sustain that illusion. And it's important for us to be aware of that.
We have time for two or three more questions. We have one here and here. Okay, right here.
All right. Hi, my name is Nadim. Well, many things I do. I run also a meetup group here about the global goals in Berlin, SDGs, and we also ran a design sprint event called the Global Goals Jam last year, which we're doing again in September. And I kind of voiced we're using the SDGs as a framework in terms of designing for sustainability, or I call it sustainability by design. And to follow a thread that, because kind of was followed here from Jörg's question, I have a quote from Laszlo Nagy from Bauhaus. He says, ultimately all problems of design merge into one great problem, design for life, if you're familiar with it. And I think this is kind of where the problem lies in terms of a bit of this discussion, because the orientation has been that we're designing for one finite human life, so when you speak of the client. And I think from that perspective, it's where we can't really expect always the client to be more educated, and maybe the owners have to shift on the designers to rebel against that idea of only human-centered design for human needs that are very finite in time, and that potentially actually lead to more consumption.
I think it's a big topic of conversation is where the focus, who you're designing for. And there is this movement towards citizen-centered design, there's something about planet-centered design, but ultimately the pragmatic aspect is someone is paying the designer, and that shapes the conversation, and that gets back to the mistake. That's where design happens. So I think we can have evenings like this, we can have great conversations, but unless it actually translates into real, tangible stuff, it's just an intention.
How, maybe with your experience, how do we move from that?
Maybe.
Oh wait, just so everyone can hear the question. Could you say this question one more time? Yeah,
how do we move from intention to actually doing it? Like, what steps can a designer do in their daily work or life to kind of trigger this type of decision making from the
Andreas.
Maybe just one remark on that one. I open every presentation I give as a lobbyist, and I spend 80% of my time as a lobbyist in Brussels, in Washington, around the world, with the SDGs and planetary boundaries slide from the Stockholm Institute, right? So how can we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and planetary boundaries? Extremely valuable, analysis. And the way to achieve that is by shaping the regulatory frameworks around the world to incentivize sustainable behavior in the design phase, right? A business would only invest if it is clear that the customer who buys ultimately the product is also incentivized to do so, right? So for me, that is where the magic happens in lobbying and in trying to shape these regulatory frameworks and overcome the impediments, as you said at the beginning, right, which are system inherent, right? And that's where I think it needs to happen. And just one last remark, if I may. Yeah. I was involved in a project over the last 5 years with the European Commission, trying to develop a communication vehicle called Product Environmental Footprint, which makes it visible to the consumer what the holistic impact of a certain product or service or organization is. It's a very, very complex thing, right? And it overwhelms everyone, right? Because you cannot expect any consumer to be a life cycle assessment specialist and going into all these details. And that's why I think it has to be the other way around, right? Having these methodologies needs to inform policy decisions to basically say, okay, we internalize external costs, we put a price tag on CO2, we put a price tag on minerals, we put a price tag on non-circular business models, and then you automatically get the results also from business, because businesses have to adopt. That's my take on it, and that's why I spent 80% as a lobbyist.
We have a question here, and I think, okay, so here we have like 2 more questions. Here, and then...
Can I maybe quickly respond to that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think it's such an important question, because who's a designer here? Okay. Who's working for clients? Who's working for clients?
Who's employed?
Clients.
Clients?
Who's got a job?
Who's working? Who has, clients like, you're dealing with clients. Now, let me put it this way. When you say, well, what should I do? I was inspired by the air conditioning story. Because we are dealing with clients, and they come with an idea or a problem, and I think the first there are 3 things I think a designer can do, or what you can do when you're dealing with somebody who has a problem that wants that solved. That's reframing the problem, basically. And I think as a designer, you are best equipped to do that. Because you know design research, you have tools and you have capabilities to take this client along in a process, basically in a story, where you change his behavior or his perspective. And the second one is simplicity. So when something is very complex, designers can make it simple, and that is a unique talent, I think. The third one is creativity. You can overwhelm also your client with creativity and use that cognitive overload to change direction. I think these 3 are powerful. This is what I see designers do. I'm not a designer, but we work with them all the time, of course. And I see that basically basically our mantra sometimes in projects is what we say, tell them what they want, but give them what they need. And this is really possible.
And I think therefore it's really important to have the empathy also for the business side. Because I think normally you have a great idea and you want to pitch it, and then the business says, oh, it's not fitting, it's too costly, whatever. So you have to understand what are the drivers to make this product, also from a business perspective, a success. Yeah, and this is what I said in the beginning. You have to think about the business model behind the sustainable product. Because someone has to invest, whether it's your client, your company, or if you're an entrepreneur, an investor. Yeah, and therefore you have to have a certain business sense to make something out of that. I think we cannot hack that, because otherwise it's hard to scale. Because you need the capital to bring your great product to the market, to the people, so that you have an impact, and you have to have that in mind.
Yeah, question here.
Yep, and I think actually Andreas started to address it already, but I just wanted to open it up. What role do you think the government should play in designing for sustainability, and specifically how do you think they should hold corporations accountable?
The problem with governments, at least in our space, is that they're only elected on time. 3 years, 4 years horizons, right? And politicians are thinking in that circle, right? There is a very rare breed to find a politician who's thinking beyond that. I think one way to address that is exactly as you say, right? Hold corporations accountable, because they're forced to think longer term as well, right? If they want to stay in business. I'm a huge fan of producer responsibility, right? To implementing frameworks which shift the burden to the corporations from the beginning, right? So that they actually engage with designers in the development of new product generations to make sure they are able to fulfill their responsibility throughout the life cycle. So that's a big enabler, right? Getting producers responsible, which obviously gets more and more complex across globalized value chains, across multiple chains of product development. But I think that is a critical enabler, and the more we can get governments around the world to recognize that and implement that in a fashion which is not changing with political flavors, the better it is, right? So I'm a big fan of producer responsibility, be it voluntary or mandatory.
And one thing what we need to do to bring that to life is to make those negative external costs that products probably have, we have to make them visible, and we have to make the companies accountable for that. Yeah, because in the end, it's about that point. Yeah, and if we are neutral or maybe even positive, then things will start to change. And many companies are still making huge profits. Yeah, out of not paying for the negative external effects they cause by doing their business. Yeah, and the government always have the excuse, oh, we have 6,000 people working in lignite, yeah, and the lignite mines and in the lignite coal plants, and we have to be careful about those jobs and not risk them, and that's why we are staying away of doing such things. Yeah, and the question is how to manage that as a political class, but also as a society, because this is a huge challenge.
Exactly, I wanted to stress this because it's not just that we can say government has to, as you said, with 4 years, but the same we have in the big companies where somebody is just there for 4 or 5 years, and he wants to stay in his job, and then it's not about changing something for the better, it's about staying in his job first, or maybe making good turnover or whatever. So I think it's up to the society at first, because the society knows what's upcoming, and the society has its interest to stay alive, to do something for the better, and second-wise, then being in the role of an employee, of an employer, or whatever.
And we've had a lot of questions from men, so can we have more women with questions, or other?
I'm queer. Does that work? Cool. I just, when we talk about... All right.
But after.
But we're friends, so it's all about, who you know. When we talk about sustainability in the human context, I find we are usually talking about unsustainability. That's why the Sustainable Development Goals drive me crazy, because I feel like they're actually the unsustainable development goals. Since all businesses are basically founded upon limitless growth and like an endless growth principle, I find it quite interesting that theology was what got you to kind of shift balance. And even though maybe you recognize that education has gone from content transmission to not, it's vastly still content transmission. That's what it's all about. So when you're learning design or you're learning economics, you're still learning quantity and not theology. And you're not learning purpose at all. I'm still really concerned about your thought experiment, because I'm still thinking what I'd tell a dolphin, and maybe I'd just be apologizing. And so I always come to these meetings and then I leave really depressed. So help me. That's my plea.
I think a lot of the inner help comes from your attitude towards the problem, right? And it's kind of like, are you giving yourself empowering thoughts or disempowering thoughts in terms of this issue? Because it's quite easy to kind of get totally lost if you try and understand the whole ocean. And so I think what becomes empowering for us individually is kind of like, what's within the reach of my hand? What is the thing that I specifically can do? And then I think you can start influencing the environment around you. It's for me to worry about something that is like so far away from my present reality here. Number one, translates into some kind of colonial mindset that says that I have the solution for that problem, and I think that's a delusion to myself. And so for me, the most empowering thing is to really start thinking about your context here and now, and how am I shaping this conversation.
I think you can get depressed very easily nowadays. I completely understand you. And I was also depressed a few days ago, where we had a work student. She came from Russia, and we talked about an African project. She jumped in, and it was about water saving. And she said, I can't develop there anything for these people because they have no water. So why talking about water saving if they have no water? So they depressed me completely. So I think everyone can do something. At first, spreading the word. Secondly, doing something in a different way. Third, I think something, as you mentioned, take part in a think tank, bringing together the minds, and then having together a louder voice, which makes a difference that others listen to.
And I always go back to like, so if I think of social change, like I go back to movements like that I've benefited directly from, like the civil rights movement. And so I think why these things are so impactful, and like why I get the opportunity to even sit here, is because someone at some point decided that they were going to dream something different, and they started talking about that dream. And because they started talking about that dream, other people stepped into it. And so our responsibility, I think, as individuals, is to start dreaming and to start talking with others about how we're going to make that dream actual and what steps we're going to take. And so I can't do everything, but then I look around this room and I don't have to do everything. I can really focus on contributing to 2 or 3 things, and I know that there's different ways that I can support other people in their initiatives. That's all I can do. But I know that I've directly benefited because other people have taken those actions despite looking around and seeing the situations that they're in that are much worse than the things that we are experiencing right now. So that's how I try and do it.
And just to quickly add to that, I also think setting the context of what's acceptable, right? So not only talking about it and taking action, but also sort of drawing a line in terms of your own influence and the people you come in contact with. This is true, as Americans, so politically we have to sort of draw a lot of lines personally in terms of what's acceptable. I think the same is true for sustainability and what we find acceptable in our own personal influence.
So 2 more questions from women would be lovely, and then we're going to open this up. We're going to wrap up the one-way diatribe. So if there are questions, that would be lovely. Right here.
Yeah. We were speaking about getting children in touch, and we are. First of all, thank you so much. You speak on time. But I'm working with a business, as you said before, and I'm trying to get them. And I'm trying, and I think that this is what Pasha said before, like you have to translate as a designer. Yes, yeah, right. But do you have any tools to bring it to them? Because I'm kind of running, and I'm trying to bring it into the business, but I'm like, this way, like, yeah, we've done this before, and we're going to use this. Yeah.
So I think there's only one solution. You have to act and show results and numbers, because all those decision makers are numbers driven.
Yeah.
You have to understand what kind of critical core hypotheses would convince them if you show them that you are right, and do it by action. Because only then you can show that you are on the right trajectory and convince them. So I've worked for over 10 years in innovation, and we have always that problem. When it comes to ideas and nice visualizations and blah, 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 this is not a solution. You have to prove and show, and I think this is something normally a designer is not supposed to do. Because you're asked to do something else. You have to come up with a solution and not prove that your solution is the better solution and compare it with another solution, really by coming up with accountable numbers. But this is how, when you look at startups, when they make decisions, whether design decisions, product decisions, they're in the end somehow all numbers based, because then you have a very strong argument to go this direction or that direction. And I think this is something that's not easy to solve, I know, but you have to think about, okay, how can I test that? And maybe sometimes it's good asking the consumer, but asking 7 consumers is probably not enough. But maybe there are ways of getting more consumers or more customers or users involved to show upfront, do it, because it's good for you, it's good for your business, and I've proven that.
But although I have the numbers, I won't get decisions. So I do think that I am going to do this like user-centered thinking, but also I am doing like what is the business really, what does they want? And then again, how can I get them what the user really needs? And even though I am doing tests and running tests, and I have all the numbers, I don't get there. And design is always like nice to have in there. It's like, what are you doing here? And I just like to bring this design thinking into the company with all my spirit and all that I am like, we've done this before.
I mean, my experience is that if you drive it too hard to show them a challenge and kind of disruptive, then people are frightened. Of course, go a step back and think, oh my God, what's happening here? I'm losing my job. I have no idea what's upcoming. So my experience is that you have to do it step by step. Get from there where they are, put yourself in their shoes, and don't do a step which is too big, just step by step, as you're developing a brand. I mean, you won't develop a good working brand to present them something completely different. You will do just slightest changes to adapt, which is possible to adapt.
Yeah, as you said before, it's all about respect, and I do have to respect the struggles as well.
Yes, right. And you never have the same type of people in front of you. So sometimes you have the person in front of you who loves the numbers. Sometimes you have somebody in front of you who's more on taking action and going together with you. So I think this is also a question you have to tell you, who's the person in front of me.
I mean, my mantra in this is good is what you know, right? So our personal horizon defines what we decide is good. So if your horizon and their horizon is not the same one, I would take a look at ways of bringing those two close together, because maybe they know something that you don't that will change that. So co-creation becomes, I think, a really important process in this regard, because buy-in is built in. If they're part of building this and they've expanded what they know to include what you know, then I think you're talking about a new dialogue.
I think it's really also important to understand the objective of this person. Yeah? What is really the objective? Yeah? And then you try to figure out how can you maybe change or shift this objective, because you know something he should know or she should know. Yeah? And working together on the objective, then you can go back and start from scratch, but then you know you're working towards the objective, yeah, and it's coherent with their thinking and what you are thinking. That's why it's really important really to start from the end and getting a joint understanding of where you're heading to, and that your solution is really coherent with what you have agreed on the objective.
Last question.
I think, hi guys, thank you. I think the burden of sustaining this planet and saving humankind falls on everybody, but I do think that certain people and certain industries pollute more than others. Do you think it's wise or reasonable to tax people and or industries and companies who pollute more in order to incentivize for them to not pollute as much as they do?
I mean, what I think, what is completely wrong is trading with pollution, with this pollution credits, what's currently ongoing. I think this is something which is completely wrong. I like more the idea you have than the idea which is currently ongoing.
And I mean, it's important to remember that whale fat used to be what they used for lights and everything, and the whale fat industry was massive, right? It was basically the oil of the day, and the whale fat industry died long before they ran out of whales, and that's, you know, thank God that we still have whales, but there's a progression in our society where taxes are maybe one part of the equation, but I think the stigma attached to those choices becomes the bigger driver for societal change. And I think this has been said a number of times, is make the invisible visible, right? Because then you have the complete picture in that sense. And I think tax is one thing, but it's so associated with, oh, that's someone else's responsibility and the government is taking care of it. But I think the process of installing that tax becomes really interesting, because that's where you build the stigma. And we as a society can understand why our immune system should be reacting to this thing.
Well, I get this idea because once you started charging for plastic bags, people ended up not buying more plastic bags. So when it became more difficult to use, or there was some sort of monetary, reason not to do it, people won't do it. So I think for example, the clothing industry, fast fashion, it is so polluting. But if they were taxed on the amount of pollution they caused, would they turn to different solutions?
The only worry I have when we start overemphasizing taxes, you get like situations like Barclay, like manipulate. So my background is in finance, and Barclay like manipulating the liberal average, right? So what they're able to do is like you can effectively weight your profits and account for like repercussions and taxes. So I think it is a deterrent, but coming back to like that also can be like, okay, we can account for that, and maybe it's still profitable. So I'm not sure if that's like the complete solution. I think it's a part of it, but I think we just need to be conscious of saying, hey, like if we just attach a monetary like dissuasion to it, people will stop doing it. I think it's.
And we have to take into consideration we are working on a planet with many different legislation and tax systems. Yeah, and we have to solve it globally. That's the problem with taxes. Yeah, and so we need really have global thinking and an agreement on how we deal with certain things, and I think that's really difficult to achieve. Yeah, and the other thing is we need to find ways how to use that money. Yeah, if we are putting it into the wrong thing, if we have collected it via the tax and not using it really to do good and to change, yeah, then it doesn't make any difference. Yeah, because then we are just migrating it to somewhere else, and it's not changing anything.
One question.
Come on, you're sneaking in.
Yeah, you were saying that design has to embrace business and other ways, vice versa. And we have like the definition of circular economy on the design side, but do you have a vision of the economy? Because right now the aim is profit. Yeah. How we can go into transition to a circular economy?
So I think how I see it is, the question is, what is the incentive to take risk, to invest, and right now it's the return on investment.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's a very complex system because it's not only the company who wants to make a profit. Yeah, it uses the profit for their investors. It uses the profit for the banks or whatever, and it's so to say inherent into the system. We are currently building our economy and every company upon, and breaking out of that. Yeah, and still getting the fuel, which is right now the money, is very difficult. Yeah, and going out of the system. And I think we need to find ways to hack the system. And the question is really, can we build this circular economy and using this very strong incentive, because it was also not bad what happened over the course of the last 200 years, yeah, because less people die on certain things, yeah, and we have a lot of inequality, yes, but it's also kind of maybe a good incentive, yeah, to make money out of that. Yeah, and that's why I wouldn't say it's all bad, and we have to think about how this might look like in the future, and maybe a tokenized system that is creating a new incentive, yeah, might help out to that. But I really see right now no easy solution to say, okay, we are all doing that for free and so on and so forth, because most of the world is working like that. And if you want to change, we need to use that system and let it work for us. And I think this is how I see it.
No, I think, I mean, just to build on that, I'm putting a huge amount of emphasis this year on impact investment and taking a look at what the role of impact investment is in that. And in the whole conversation about regenerative design, people often forget exactly as you point out, that the funders need to be involved in a regenerative conversation. And I think that missing link is extremely important, right? Because it is a part of the system as well.
Yeah. And for example, when you look at what's happening in finance, yeah, for example, ETFs, yeah, that collect a lot of companies that do things in a sustainable way, yeah, towards their employees, towards the environment. They perform better from a financial point of view in return on investment than companies that don't do. Yeah, and so it's kind of an incentive to say, okay, let's put my money, my private money or the money of an institution into that kind of fund, and it then allocates the money to those businesses. So it's also a question how to allocate that, because you're making probably a better profit with a sustainable company than with the other. And I think this is a good thing if this starts to working out, and then financial streams get shifted and will work for us. That's probably a good thing.
And so with that, we'll close up. I think just a couple words. At the end of the day, I think sustainability is something that we all benefit from. And so us all taking action, I think the ways that we move towards that is like you're looking around, right? It doesn't, just because we're sitting up here, we have one specific perspective, we do things in a way, but I think it's because of the enormity and the gravity of this, I think it's really about us figuring out different ways that we can all participate. So obviously you can see how many varieties of different perspectives, different things that we've all done, but I think investing in some kind of action of some kind, I think not anything, but I think also having more conversations, I think gets us to that future that hopefully we can all be excited about. So a couple quick notes. If you could, we have what is sustainability kind of board up here. We'd love to get your thoughts. So if you can kind of share what sustainability means to you, that would be amazing. Also, a quick note, we'll have more of these every couple months around a variety of different topics. Really the purpose of these is to come together as a community and kind of share and like work with each other and also get new ideas. So we'll have more of these, so please follow us on Facebook or Twitter. And also kind of last quick note, housekeeping, as you go out and go down the stairs, please be very quiet. This is also a residential building, so there are families, so it would be amazing if you could try and be as quiet as you can. And last thing, if you could give it up for these wonderful speakers for kind of giving up their time and sharing their perspectives. There's still food and drinks and get to know each other and speak, but also thank you for going out.
Thanks, Max.